Footprints in the sand. These footprints are midway on East Beach. They are heading west, and they are mine. January of 1991. Many footprints have walked East Beach, and that post that you see marks where the houses used to stand before the 1938 hurricane. Today, the houses, the sheds, and trailers in the summertime are closer to the road. And it was just beyond that post that the Trafford houses stood. Further down the beach, there was a church, the Surfside Hotel, a post office, and Burton had built his 18-room boarding house for hunters before the turn of the century. Those houses you see were built after the 1938 hurricane. At one time, there used to be an A&P there, a 2-story hotel, a skating rink, roller skating that is, and a dance hall. And now we come to Horseneck Point. That is where East Beach and West Beach come to a point. And it was on this point that Allen chose to build his house, and next door, Dr. Hall. And amazingly, those two houses still stand. Somehow, they survived all the hurricanes. Just south of Horseneck Point lies Gooseberry. The Army put those towers there during World War II. Today, they act as sentinels for the fishermen. Today, Gooseberry is state-owned. And also today, you can get over Gooseberry easily over a man-made causeway, where at one time you couldn't. At the opposite end of East Beach, looking east, lies the town beach, where at one time there were 20, maybe 30 houses clear to the Dartmouth line. And that is the Fishing Rock. I was told at one time that stood high and dry on the sands. Today only partly so at low tide. With the Fishing Rock behind me looking west again, we see the priest's house, so called because Father LaMontagne built that house in 1955. Today it has new owners. The priest's house just behind me, I am now standing in front of what used to be the Ocean House Hotel. And right there I see another old foundation. And also we have come back midway on the beach to my footprints in the sand. Now I would like to invite you into my house and show you pictures. Pictures of an era gone by. It sure was cold out there. Now that I'm in the warmth of my house, I'll open up my album and show you East Beach in its heyday. I've always wondered whose footprints walked before mine on Horseneck and decided to do something about it. I've poked through many books at the library, scanned many old newspapers, and read a lot of old deeds. I talked to a lot of people, and some loaned me old pictures and postcards and their fond memories from the horse and buggy days up until devastation hit Horseneck. All these homes on East Beach were destroyed in one afternoon, disappeared forever in the hurricane of 1938. A few houses on Horseneck took the brunt of the storm, but East Beach was swept clean. Some people survived to tell their stories, others did not. The hurricane of 1938 is now history, and there has been a dramatic change on Horseneck, as you'll see in the following pictures. It's pictures like this that first aroused my curiosity. East Beach has shrunk so much from the erosion that it's hard to believe houses of this size once lined its shores. This is East Beach Road looking west in the days when electric was coming to Horseneck, replacing those old gas lamps you see on the road. To the right of this picture is Folly Lane, and that building on left edge with the windmill is the Ocean House Hotel. This is a close-up of the Ocean House. This picture is a copy from an old Standard Times issue. The corresponding article tells about a fire destroying this hotel in 1933. Quoting from that article, the flames had gained such headway that little could be done, and firemen concentrated their efforts on saving the cottage to the west, owned by Daniel Sullivan of New Bedford. Streams of water were directed on the outer wall, and they were able to check the fire. The cottage to the east of the hotel, owned by Mr. Davis of Fall River, was not damaged. A bowling alley, which was separate from the main building, was also saved, but the flames swept through a dance hall and dining room addition." End quote. I imagine the bowling alleys must be that long, low building between Windmill and that building on the road. It also said in that March 1933 article, the hotel was built 50 years ago. So that would mean Josiah Wood built in 1883. The Ocean House was the first hostelry on Horseneck Beach. This beach view shows the front of Ocean House in the foreground. Looking further down the beach, you can see the Traffords. It's not too far, just where that flag is flying. Let's go down and see. There were 3 Trafford houses on East Beach. This one was the largest. Quite an impressive house, isn't it? I got a kick out of the message on back of this postcard. It reads, "One of the swell houses on Horseneck where I am swelling as much as any of them through other windows." How true that is. The view is the same for all of us. 2 years before the hurricane, the Sinclairs bought this house, so they were the ones who suffered the loss in the storm. I've talked to the Sinclair daughter, and she told me this house had 5 fireplaces, and it was full of antiques and artifacts, which they never found a trace of, in the former residence of W.C. Trafford. I don't know when this house was built, but I do know, according to a deed I read, Amy G. Trafford, wife of William C. Trafford, purchased land from Thomas Tripp August 31st, 1898. It was a strip of land 98 foot wide, extending from the Buzzards Bay to the Let. It was bounded on the west by H. L. Trafford and bounded on the east by Thomas Tripp. The deed also reads, "Subject to all rights public have in highway across that strip of land." This is that highway, East Beach Road, looking back east, showing the two Trafford houses on the right. And a beach view. Even though there have always been cobblestones, the Traffords also had a wide sandy beach. But that beach has disappeared slowly over the years. Those posts near the water's edge in this 1989 picture is where the houses used to stand. And if they still were there, high tide would always reach their doorstep. And in a southeast storm, they'd have wet carpets. Getting back to the Trafford days, with the Tripp house next door, you can see the Ocean House further down. And since we are facing east again, let's backtrack past the Ocean House to the town beach beyond. Those people walking the wide sandy beach are probably heading back to the Ocean House, which is behind us now. Arrow points to what I was told was Petty's Hotel. The Fishing Rock is in front of Petty's, and beyond is the beginning of the town beach. Let's go down and see what it looked like in the early 1900s. Standing on the Fishing Rock, you see approximately 20 houses clear to the Dartmouth line. Imagine that. Today there's hardly room for that many cars. And that 2.5-story house in the middle is the Kingfisher House, owned by John T. King. A lot of my information comes from old Westport Street directories, and in a 1905 one, along with John King, was listed a John Fish on Horseneck. I often wonder if Mr. King and Mr. Fish got together and formed the Kingfisher House. I found this ad in a 1915 Westport directory. Kingfisher House, Horseneck Beach, South Westport, Mass. Summer boarders, transients accommodated, fish and lobster dinners a specialty. Prices reasonable. J. T. King, proprietor. Well, there was no mention of John Fish as owner in that ad, but maybe he supplied it for the fish dinners they served here in days gone by. Here's some of the houses beyond the Kingfisher. And more further down, clear to the Dartmouth line. This is Quonset Rocks on the Dartmouth side. In the distance, you see that row of houses that once lined a town beach in Westport. Horseneck Road is the dividing line between Westport and Dartmouth. In this picture, we are standing on Horseneck Road where it curves around to East Beach. Let's get back out on the beach again in front of those houses for a better look. Out on the beach again in front of those houses. We'll now meander slowly back. all the way to Horseneck Point, where East and West Beach join. But before we get there, we have some more stops to make along East Beach. So let's get going. Another look at the Kingfisher as we pass by. In this picture, postmarked 1908, you can see the ocean house straight ahead. But before we'd get there, we'd pass Elijah Small's house. If you got back up on the road and turned around briefly, we'd see these houses. And strolling by the ocean house again, we see the Trafford houses ahead. In this picture, you see all three Trafford houses. The third one down belonged to Charles Trafford. Lewis lived next door, and where you see that X further down is the Surfside Hotel, where we will visit now. Surfside Cottage, L.L. Gifford Proprietus, Horseneck Beach, Southwestport, Mass. Board, $8 to $10 per week. But don't bother rushing down. Those prices were 80 years ago. Lydia and John Gifford, owners of the Surfside Hotel. From what I have read, the Giffords made quite an impression with 50 years of service on Horseneck Beach. A lot of my information came from this old Standard Times article dated June 4th, 1936, telling the end of the Surfside after Lydia's death in April of that year. John had died 5 months previous. Surfside at Horseneck Beach, in final chapter as hostelry. It's a pretty long article, and I'd like to read you portions of it as I show you pictures of the Surfside history. Quote, in horse and buggy days, the structure was widely known to vacationists. The Surfside has been through a change in popularity which ties up indirectly with the machine age. The Surfside, once the rendezvous of prominent New Bedford and Fall River residents and known to summer visitors from all parts of the country, will soon be nothing but a memory. Furnishings of the hotel, landmark on the beach, will be sold at auction soon to settle the estate of owner Mrs. Lydia L. Bessie Gifford, who died 5 weeks ago. The building is to be sold later. Stocks and fixtures of the grocery store behind the hotel, owned and managed by Mrs. Gifford's husband John I. Gifford until his death, have been sold. Summer residents at Horseneck will miss Mr. Gifford and his store. The establishment, with a record of 22 years of service, had become an institution at the resort. Like the hotel, it saw the growth of the beach from a Sunday picnic ground to the present cottage resort. Some will remember summers about 50 years ago when on the site where Surfside Hotel stands today, Mrs. Gifford served lunches, chowder, and refreshments from a tent to New Bedford and Fall River residents who drove to the beach in horse-drawn vehicles. Mrs. Gifford was ambitious, and she was a fine cook. She soon abandoned her tent for a one-room wooden building on East Beach. Additions were built until the structure reached its present proportions, a 16-room building, exclusive of kitchens. End quote. Just about everyone I talk to mentions the Surfside and the Giffords. I guess they live there year-round. John's favorite pastime was duck hunting, and Lydia loved to collect antiques. She displayed many in her dining room here at the hotel. She also loved flowers, as shown here. Old boats and tubs full alongside. That boardwalk leads to the barn in back, and John's store and post office on East Beach Road. There was even tubs of flowers on the porch of store and post office. John Gifford was postmaster of Horseneck from 1914 to 1930. I have a few postcards in my album with a Horseneck Beach postmark. Another thing in my album is this copy of a postcard Lydia Gifford mailed in 1906. The message is short. December 6, 1906. Much pleased. Come again. Ideal. Mrs. L. L. Gifford. This picture is one of my favorites of East Beach in its heyday. A typical busy day at a popular gathering place. Post office and Gifford store, Horseneck, Mass. We're looking east on East Beach Road in the early days. Some years later, a Catholic church was built next door. Fall River Herald News, September 23, 1938. Hurricane wrecks church at Horseneck. The caption below reads, "Little if anything remains today to designate the place where St. Rose of Lima Chapel on East Beach formerly stood. Constructed for the convenience of vacationists a few years ago, the chapel was leveled during the hurricane, which left devastation in this area." I think 1938 was really the final chapter of the Surfside. The Giffords died 2 years before, and maybe it was a blessing that they didn't witness the destruction like their neighbor did next door to the Giffords. That big white house on edge of picture in this early photo belonged to Frederick B. Head. My guess is this picture was taken before the turn of the century, because further up the beach I see a vacant lot waiting for the Trafford House, not even built yet. Mr. Head was the oldest Horseneck resident, and he saw many more vacant lots when he built his house. He lived a lifetime here, and he died here with his boots on. Standard Time, September 24th, 1938. Frederick B. Head. Searchers today found the body of Mr. Head, 89-year-old Horseneck Beach resident, in marshes 3/4 of a mile from East Beach. Mr. Head's many friends called him Burton Head. He had been a year-round resident of East Beach 64 years and witnessed the development of that section into a popular resort. I found another article on Mr. Head at the library, source unknown, but it was dated a year before his death, September 16, 1937. Portions of it reads, "Oldest Horseneck Beach resident. Frederick Burton Head lives at East Beach in an 18-room gunning camp boarding house that he built 61 years ago when there was not one house at Horseneck Beach." That means that he built this gunning camp boarding house for hunters in 1876. In the article, Mr. Head said, "When I came to Horseneck, there was not one building there except for some bowling alleys with some bedrooms. I took it over and opened up the room to gunners who were very numerous in those days. Business was so good that I built my 18-room boarding house shortly after I came to Horseneck. For quite a while, it was the only house at the beach." 2 doors down from Mr. Head was the Zimmerman house. Helen Zimmerman will be 91 this year. She tells me her father built their house around 1902. In her early days, she says there was only one house from hers to the end of the beach. Her mother allowed her to walk to Horseneck Point alone because she could watch her from their porch. Beyond the point, you can see Gooseberry. Helen tells of rowing over there, for there was no causeway in those days. Or you could walk across a natural bar of rocks at low tide. If you overstayed your visit, you either swam back or bedded down till the next low tide. Helen tells of running home one day to tell her mother of men filling in the bar with big stones. Her mother shook her head and said, "That is a bad thing to do." Well, after many attempts, they finally succeeded. We now have a man-made road blocking the natural flow of the tides. And like Mrs. Zimmerman, many people have been shaking their heads ever since. In this early photo, you can see Mother Nature's natural flow of waters, showing Gooseberry on the left with the sheep barn. Sheep were often taken there to graze. There have been many articles of people getting caught on Gooseberry. One I read of a man going over with his horse and lingered too long. On returning, the tide had come in so much that he was obliged to swim his horse. After a while, the horse refused to continue with him on his back, so he slipped off and held on to the tail and was safely carried over. This picture shows the parallel rows of stones placed on each side of bar in the effort to build the causeway. First attempts failed. I guess it was the Army who finished it in World War II. Incidentally, this is what those towers looked like when the Army occupied the Gooseberry. Getting back to the Zimmerman house again, directly behind the house was South Shore Road. The Zimmerman property line extended from that road 125 feet to the ocean. Today, the lot is in the ocean during a southeast storm. That cabin you see is where the Zim house once stood. Even South Shore Road is slowly crumbling away. In fairness, it's not always this bad. On a normal day, there's some beach left, but not 125 feet. And now we come to the western end of East Beach, at Horseneck Point. In this picture, standing on East Beach Road, a curve left takes you to Gooseberry. A right turn is West Beach Road. Straight ahead is Allen's. Helen tells me Allen built his house around 1910. Next door is Dr. Hall's. A comparison picture today shows little change, except later model cars and new owners. Allen's is now Chandy's by the Sea. Somehow these houses survived the hurricanes. Fall River Hurricane Book, 1938. These 3 homes were the only ones at Horseneck Beach to stand the storm's fury. The occupants watched the storm sweep buildings into the sea and swamps. This beach view shows Allen's house built atop a grassy knoll. I often wonder if the position of Gooseberry in relation to Horseneck Point saved these homes. They did get some damage, as you saw, but they sure stood their ground. A few years later, probably 1913, Allen's built this long, low building, which I guess is bathhouses. Also note the windmill on your left. And on the end of those bathhouses, he built his store. That building you see in the distance on the right is the life-saving station. With Allen's on your left out of the picture and Gooseberry behind, you face the life-saving station. That curve to the left is West Beach Road, but you could only go midway in this time. It wasn't until 1935 that West Beach Road was completed, clear down to Plants Beach. In this 1938 picture, standing on the causeway looking back up East Beach again, arrow points to the Zimmerman house. They sold in 1917. So Mrs. Zimmerman didn't witness the change in her unobstructed view to the point when 5 more houses and an ice cream stand were added. And little did anyone know in this peaceful June 1938 scene that the biggest change of all would come in 3 short months. But 10 years before this picture was taken, let me tell you of a fire that raged out of control on the north side of the road behind those houses. Standard Times, September 17, 1928. Horseneck Beach suffers worst fire in its history. Blaze that starts in the breakers destroyed 3 buildings and damages a 4th before being subdued. Firemen are handicapped by sand clogging pumps. I have no close pictures of that corner, just this postcard, postmarked 1923. The biggest loss in the fire was the breakers, owned by the Horseneck Amusement Company. It had a bowling alley and a roller skating rink, also used as a dance floor. Everything was destroyed, including the old skating rink organ. The hotel and garage next door also burned to the ground, but the next building, the A&P, only partially so. The house's beach side was saved, but reading the article, it's a wonder the whole corner didn't go. It reads, "They attempted to draw water from the bay, but the tide was low and sand was drawn into the pumps. They had to go to Allen's Pond on the Dartmouth side to clean out the sand before they could resume operations. on the fire. Now we're going to change our direction a little. This picture from the causeway looks straight on to Horseneck Point with East Beach on your right. It shows West Beach curving to the left. Let's take a short trip down. I don't have too much on West Beach, but there were cottages there too. West Beach, Horseneck Beach, Mass. Yes, West Beach was lined with cottages also, but East Beach built up first, probably because of its easy accessibility with Horseneck Road, and also that's where the activity was. Ocean House was built before the old wooden bridge spanned the West Fork River, and when Old John Reed Road was probably just a path. Some here on West Beach may have rented out their cottages, but there was no big hotels, just 2 pavilions, the first midway on the West Beach. Hutchinson's Midway Pavilion, Horseneck Beach, Mass. I don't know what that Poe's group is all about, but I'm sure they're having a good time, as I did further down at my favorite place. Am I prejudiced? Yes, that's correct. For this is Plant's Pavillion, where I spent my early childhood, for I am a former plant. Right behind this building would be Bridge Street, leading up to the old wooden bridge. But just before the bridge would be Old John Reed Road, which would take us back to East Beach. Since I started there, let's go back and end there. I can't swear this is John Reed Road, but this is what it looked like. It meandered through the dunes and scrub pines along the let and came out on East Beach Road. It came out approximately here at John Gifford's store. Well, I hope you enjoyed our journey in the past as much as I enjoyed doing it. My album contains over 100 pages of pictures, postcards, and newspaper articles, and memories from a lot of friends. I'd like to mention all their names, but the list is too long. I could very well run out of tape. So I hope that this blanket thank you will cover all names not mentioned. It's fully intended to anyways. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. My special thanks goes to Alan and Barbara Shaw for inviting me into their home. Alan let me browse through his postcard collection and even trusted me with many so I could have them copied. Thank you both for putting up with me. And to that good friend who took all those pictures for me, I want to thank Bobby Allen for her tireless effort. You did a beautiful job, Bobby. Thanks a bunch. And last but not least, many, many thanks to Kay Donnelly for sharing her wonderful memories here on East Beach. Kay let me pour through all her family albums and gave me many pictures for mine. For Kay spent a lot of time here at the Surfside with her great-aunt Lydia L. Bessie Gifford. And as you now know, it was the Giffords, Lydia and John, whose footprints in the sand made an important impression on East Beach in its heyday. My photo album the other day, and I wondered how it would look on tape, so I decided to try it. And this is my attempt. Won't you come with me over the years at plants? These two houses were located on Horseneck Beach at the foot of what we now know as Bridge Street. According to an 1895 map, the one on the left belonged to the Tripp brothers, Albert and Alfred, who also owned the Point Market, and Agnes Wise of New Bedford owned the one on the right. I don't know when the houses were built, but according to the deeds, Agnes Wise bought her lot, 100 square foot on the beach, from Charles H. Gifford in 1892. A year later, progress came to Horseneck. In the early days, people from the Point had to row across this river and walk a well-worn path through the dunes and scrub pines to go to the beach. But in 1893, this bridge connected the village to Horseneck. Travel became easier, and it provided access for Agnes Wise to get to her beach property. That well-worn path now became ruts in a wider, sandy road. This postcard shows that road leading from the wooden bridge to Horseneck Beach. In later years, it was aptly named Bridge Street. I was told that that white horse and buggy belonged to a photographer who took the pictures, and he liked to include them in his picture postcards. Here's another postcard, the road to West Beach, Westport, Mass. You can see the roof of Agnes Wise's house beyond. Shall we go for a visit? Well, here we are, but it looks like the photographer beat us to it. So let's take a side trip through the dunes. The Tripp brothers bought their land in 1894. Both the Wise and Tripp lots were part of 30 acres that Charles H. Gifford acquired from his father, George Gifford, in 1864. You can see the Tripp house and roof of Wise house in the upper right-hand corner. This is a family photo of those same two houses that the Plants owned by 1921. They bought the Tripp house from Amelia Scully in 1919 and the Wise house from Agnes Wise in 1921. I'd like you to meet Elzire and Delvina Plant, my grandparents. They are standing in front of the Wise house on the roof of their new addition below. Yes, that is correct. They simply raised the Wise house and built their business below. You can see in this picture how the porch of Wise house overlooks the roof of that new business addition. The bathhouses are over on the left, and that corner door for refreshments like ice cream, sandwiches, soda, or whatever. Ginny has a picture in her album showing a sign at that same door advertising lobster rolls, 25 cents. My, how times and prices have changed. This picture shows my father, Henry, and his sister, my Aunt Jean, enjoying the beach in front of the bathhouses. That looks like Gramp in the doorway, probably waiting for customers, and believe me, they came. From foot passage, horse and buggy passage, to automobile passage, that wooden bridge brought more and more people, and so the crowds grew, along with plants, over the years. Here's a happy group, back in the 20s. Another crowd in the 30s. This postcard was postmarked in the 1941. Plants, Horseneck Beach, Westport, Mass. And here's a big crowd in the 50s. From the looks of them, I don't think there's anyone left in the city. But let's go back to the 20s and continue the progress of plants. Here we are, back in front of plants in 1921, showing the Trip House next door. Unfortunately, a year later, the Wise House and business burned to the ground. Undaunted, the plants built again. I think this is my favorite picture of Plants Pavillion. Unfortunately, a few years later, the plants suffered another fire when the Trip House burned down. I don't know if the pavilion also burned or was deliberately torn down, but by 1929 or 1930, the plants went all out. And this large pavilion dominated the Wise and Trip lots on Horseneck Beach. I remember this building well, at least the upstairs, for that's where we lived summers. The left side was the living quarters, and the right side a hall rented out for bingo, dance bands, or whatever. I have only vague memories of the business layout below. Why should I, when I spent my days on the beach with Ginny, Roger, and Paul? Here I am in 1934 with Norma and my father. (1935). Little did the plants know that tragedy would strike again in 3 more years. Before I go on with the pictures in my photo album, I would like to show you a copy of a tape Richard Earl gave me. It is taken from an old movie his father, Melton Earl, took of their bathhouses. The first portion in color is in the 50s, and it shows the spindrift in the background. But when it goes to black and white, that is in the 30s, and you will catch a good glimpse of this building, Plants Pavillion, next door to Earl's bathhouses. That was a thrill to me to see that tape. It brought back many, many memories. In 1938, disaster struck all of New England without warning. Plant's Pavillion, along with everything else on Horseneck Beach, was totally destroyed in the hurricane on September 21, 1938. Horseneck Beach was devastated in the storm. This picture, among many, was in the Fall River Hurricane book. It reads, "Thousands of people visited Plant's Pavillion at West Horseneck Beach during the summer months. The morning of September 22, 1938, this was all that remained of the popular swimming spot." In the New Bedford book, Mr. Plant and his wrecked pavilion. From my photo album, The Plants Looking Through the Wreckage. This one is Grandma, wondering where to begin. For once more, the plants have to rebuild. Using the same concrete blocks, the following summer, 1939, Plants was in business again. The building was smaller, but the business still flourished. Those are cabanas and the bathhouses on the right. They were destroyed in still another hurricane 6 years later in 1944. The building survived. Shortly after, my father Henry took over the business and changed the name to the Spindrift. But most people still called it Plants. This is Shirley Plant, Gary Plant, and Bob Shea. I don't know who the other girl is, but I want you to note the new bathhouses going up after the 1944 hurricane. The structures on the beach changed over the years, but the beach remained the same. It was a happy place for all of us. So let's go back in time again and see the beach. That's Grandma on the right, in the 20s. My father with a friend. The arrow points to the trip house, and next to it is Earl's Bathhouses. Irene, my Aunt Irene, and her friend. Here I am with my mother, and that's Roger in the background, hurrying to get into the picture. My Aunt Jean in front of the bathhouses with the Spindrift in the background. My Uncle Norman and Aunt Julia, and there's the bathhouses being built in the background. And this is their daughter, Karen. Isn't she a doll? This is 1945. Well, aren't we a happy group? Here I am with my cousins back in the 30s again. Roger, Pauline, Ginny, and Paul. Here's Ginny and I 15 years later. A couple of bathing beauties. All grown up, so we thought. Grandma and Grandpa thinking over those years. Sometimes sad, but most times happy. They renovated this concrete building, which was a garage, into an apartment for themselves, and continued to run the bathhouses in front. And there were new changes with the Spindrift too, especially the price of lobster. I'll bet that lobster in 1947 was more than 25 cents. Inside the dining room, Henry built this fireplace using the cobblestones from the beach. This is not a clear picture, but this is the dining room, set up for a banquet. And this is the bar, and that's a dining alcove in the background. Grandma came in every afternoon to read her paper at her favorite booth. And back out on the beach again, a new generation. These are my children, Billy, Carol, and David, taken in 1952, 2 years before still another hurricane strikes Horseneck. This one struck on August 31, 1954. This is from the Fall River Hurricane book, showing the rear of the Spindrift. The dining room wall facing beach is completely gone, but the rest of the building survived, and so did the fireplace on your left. Here's some pictures from my photo album. That's the front facing the beach. What a mess. And this is that dining room wall. And that fallen beam you see was the support for upstairs. Two days later, raising that beam. This is the kitchen wall and the walk-in cooler. Food was everywhere from the cooler. Lobsters, hot dogs, whatever. Grandma even found a lobster in her bedroom. Her house survived the storm, but the bathhouses were completely washed away. This is Grandma and Grandpa's house. Water got inside, but that was about all. Back in business again the following year, 1955. This is my husband, Bill, waiting for customers at the new bar built along that wrecked dining wall. The window overlooks new outdoor patio facing the beach. This is that patio in early spring, just getting ready to open for another busy summer season. And business continued busy as usual for 3 more remaining years. This is the last picture taken in front of Plant Spindrift. That is my youngest daughter, Debbie, 1 year old, taken August 1958. My father took this picture knowing it would be the only one of Debbie in front of plants, because the state had their eyes on Plants Beach. It's been almost 40 years over the years at Plants. But in those 40 years, 2 fires and 3 hurricanes never stopped them from rebuilding. The final blow came in September of 1958, when Plants had to close their doors and turn the key over to the state. It is now a state beach for the public. That makes me laugh, because I wonder who all those people were sitting in front of Plants over the years. Oh well, let me tell you about 2 more fires on state-owned property. Standard Times, October 13, 1966. I'll read the caption. Horseneck Beach Landmark. The once popular and lively Spindrift restaurant, now owned by state and used for housing beach equipment, burned to the ground yesterday before firefighters were summoned. Building housed lifeboats, refuse barrels, and other items used at State Beach. Fire Chief Linwood Potter said, call came in at 5 a.m. Cause of blaze is under investigation and amount of loss unknown, he said. These are from my photo album. Do you notice the fireplace? It still stands. I guess when my father builds them, he really builds them. Arrow points through the window to Grandma's house. That survived the fire. Here's the last picture of Grandma and Grandpa's house in 1980. It burned down a few years later. That's my daughter Carol standing on the dune overlooking what used to be Plants.